The war in Ukraine has been raging for over a year, and to deter Russia's plan to invade Ukraine, scores of nations imposed sanctions on it, thinking this might stop the Russian aggression. But despite the sanctions being imposed on Moscow, the country's economy has been comparatively stable. According to a report by the New York Times, despite the sanctions, the Russian aviation industry was still able to import aircraft parts. These aircraft parts are from Western nations, manufactured by the American company Boeing and the French company Airbus. The newspaper reported that last year, thousands of batches of aircraft parts were successfully shipped to Russia. And to our surprise, the Russian companies that imported the aircraft parts include sanctioned airlines like Russia, Aeroflot, S7 Airlines, and UTair. Russian customs data shows that millions of dollars of aircraft parts made by Boeing, Airbus, and other Western companies were sent to Russia during the first 8 months of 2022. Within 8 months, $14.4 million worth of U.S.-made aircraft parts were shipped to Russia. But how did the Russian aviation manage to import these parts? This was possible due to the work of illicit companies by shuffling goods through a series of straw buyers, often in the Middle East and Asia. But now the question arises, did Boeing go against the U.S. sanctions? Boeing said it had fully complied with the curbs. It even suspended providing parts, maintenance, and technical support for companies based in Russia in the spring of 2022. Moreover, the double standard of West can be seen when they accuse India of reselling Russian oil to Europe. EU's High Representatives for Foreign Policy, Joseph Borrell, said that the European Union should crack down on India reselling Russian oil to Europe. In the past year, India emerged as a top buyer of Russian oil, which has been rejected by Western nations. Access to cheap Russian crude has boosted output and profit at Indian refineries, enabling them to export refined products competitively to Europe and take bigger market share. Borrell further added that any mechanism to stem the flow of Russian oil would need to be implemented by the national authorities, suggesting that the EU could target buyers of India refined fuel if they believe they are derived from Russian crude. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz believes that influential countries such as India, Vietnam, and South Africa hesitate at criticizing Russia's invasion of Ukraine because they believe international principles are not applied equally.
These questions deserve an answer. When I talk to leaders from those countries, many assure me that they are not questioning the underlying principles of our international order. What they are struggling with is the unequal application of those principles. What they expect is representation on equal terms and an end to Western double standards.
So does the West hold a double standard from putting sanctions on Moscow? Russia is still able to do business with companies from the West. All right, for more on this, we are being joined by Elizabeth Braw from Washington, D.C. Elizabeth is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Elizabeth, good to see you and welcome back to WION. You know, this admission by Olaf Scholz is probably a sober reality. It's clear that most countries, notably in the global south, view the war in Ukraine as mostly being a European or American problem. They're hyper-focused on protecting their own interests economically and otherwise, as they should be. So, in your opinion, why has the Western messaging led by the United States about threats to the world order fallen on deaf ears?
Well, as you say, every country acts in its own interest, but the expectation of Western countries has been for a long time, especially in recent years as the world has become less stable. The expectation of Western governments has been that they should act in the global interest, and there is always a dilemma because those two things can sometimes clash, and they do clash in this case. But I think where the West has, or Western governments have gone wrong is that they have essentially told other countries that other countries should side with the West, rather than pointing out to other countries that it's in their own interest to join the West in trying to end this war, and it's in other countries' interest to try to help to end this war, because the war is making the whole world unstable, the global economy unstable, and if Russia manages to continue this war against Ukraine, it sends a message to other countries that they can invade their neighbors with impunity. And I don't think that's something that any country in the global south or elsewhere wants to see the world turn into.
As we mentioned, the admission by Olaf Scholz seems like a sober reality, but then he makes suggestions that perhaps we'll get a lot of countries on our side if we help them and assist them. And the first thing that he talks about is the issue of climate change. Is that realistic? Is that what countries out of the West want to focus on right now, the issue of climate change solely?
Well, climate change is the one most pressing issue facing every country on the earth, and especially countries in the global south. So I think if we have a unite around that, that would be a fantastic step. And we should remember that this war in Ukraine is causing an enormous increase in CO2 emissions, simply because the wars include actions that cause a lot of carbon dioxide emissions. But if Western governments can convince countries in the global south and indeed around the world that they too contribute to making the world safer by joining Western sanctions, then I think everybody would benefit. And then people will say, well, countries in the global south can't put a lot of pressure on Russia because they don't trade a lot with Russia. But it's more about the symbolism for Russia to see in the United Nations that there is a majority of member states in the United Nations proposing wars of invasion. And I think every country in the world is worried about being invaded by a stronger country. So that's I think, a good bottom line on which to unite against this war, regardless of how countries view Western actions and Western sanctions.
Senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, Elizabeth Braw, joining us this morning from Washington, D.C. Thank you for that analysis.